fighting of a mysterious, this is the kind of most mysterious character in the whole cathedral. He has a peculiar head, something like a dog's head. And that's often called a cynocephalic character, or one of the cynocephalic race. And if this is indeed painted during or shortly after the time that Harald Hardrada spent in Kyiv, what is kind of interesting here is why is this painted, and what was the meaning behind it, and in what ways would this painting be interpreted? The reason why it's called a Varangian is that he holds, you see it over his head, a battle axe, and so often, very often in Byzantine art as well, a visual sign of this being a Scandinavian warrior. It's peculiar part of the armory of the Scandinavians. There are a few scholars who have discussed this painting before. One of them is Neil Price. And he kind of argues that it is the dog-headed creatures that is of most interest in the painting. With a dog head, maybe a wolf's head even, you could compare them to the, well, animalistic warriors in Scandinavian tradition, where you have a character, a god like Odin, who can transform himself into different animal shapes. And where in skaldic poetry, for instance, in the poetry associated to the Battle of Havsfjord in the late 9th century, you have this mention of the berserker, the berserks, that more or less appeared as wild animals, as wolves or bears. And here you have some, well, this is pre-Viking age, but still, where you have what appears as dog-headed or wolf-headed creatures. So, in Neil Price's view, the dog-headed warrior in the Sofia Cathedral in Kyiv might have been an allusion to this animalistic warriors, warriors or berserkers in Old Norse tradition. You find it in some other visual representations as well. This is a runestone in Sweden, where you also see something like a dog-headed creature. If it's a warrior or not is not certain, but at least a very peculiar head. And this is also something we could expect finding in the Eastern tradition, among Scandinavian warriors going to Kyiv and further south to the Byzantine Empire. You have one source, just picked this one from Leo Diaconus, who actually went to Constantinople at the end of the 10th century, who mentioned these rus that during battle, during fighting, made no noise that sounded like the screams of animals. They howled in frenzy without thinking about their own safety. So here it seems to kind of confirm this idea about the wild and predatory animalistic warriors from the north that kind of brought this tradition of being a berserker even in their service of the Byzantine emperor. But then we have another kind of peculiar source written in the 950s by the Emperor Constantine VII. And this is a source that another scholar, Terry Gunnell, has linked to this mural painting in the Sofia Cathedral in Kyiv. Because in this book of ceremonies that the emperor wrote in the late 950s, there is a description of many of the games at the hippodrome, but also at the imperial palace. And one of them seems to allude to the use of masks of these northern warriors. And it describes this passage, two Goths clad in gowns with the hair outwards and in masks of different appearance, and in the left hand a shield, in the right, by contrast, a staff. As soon as the emperor has come in from his equestrian games, he orders the master of ceremonies to begin, and he in turn passes this on to the general superintendent of the acting. When this man has left the great dining room, he orders them, the masked men, to come in. They rush in quickly, while at the same time striking their shields with the staffs that they are carrying, and they will make a great noise, and that they continually cry, "Yule, Yule." So that's the first time Yule is ever mentioned in a written source. And so take themselves forward almost to the holy table. That's where the emperor sits. When they have almost reached it, the two companions run in from both sides together, so as to build a double rank. Then when they have in this way run 3 times around the holy table, each section withdraws back to their places, and the two parties, who are called Goths, read aloud the so-called Gothic song. It is a kind of a skaldic poem or something like that. So Terry Gunnell has written this great book about the drama in medieval Scandinavia. Interprets this as a kind of a remnant of something you don't find in written sources in Scandinavia, of course, from the Viking Age. A remnant of a kind of entertainment or rituals, maybe performed in Scandinavia as well during mid-winter festivals, maybe at the chieftains' halls in Scandinavia. And Constantine VII, he would be known in Kyiv as well. This is one of another mural painting in the Sofia Cathedral, where Olga Elena of Kyiv and this Constantine VII are paired together. And it seems to be confirmed, this kind of entertaining aspect of the scene, with the dog-headed warrior and the Varangian warrior on the other side, because it's placed among other scenes of entertainment inspired by Byzantine art, and seems to replicate or allude to scenes at the Byzantine imperial palace. Both the hippodromes that was mentioned earlier by David, and also other more like musical entertainment that are close by the mural painting of the dog-headed warrior and the Varangian. So this is a drawing of some of these scenes with kind of musical entertainment. And Terry Gunnell also points at this archaeological find from Hedeby or Haitabu, conventionally dated from the 10th, maybe late 10th century, so it would be fairly contemporary to Constantine VII's Book of Ceremonies, where you have actually something similar to dog-headed masks. And at the drawing at the lower right there, from the publications from the Hedeby excavations, you see something like that would remind you of the scene at, or the image at the runic stone from Sweden. But is it though? Might be some other explanation as well. And I will try to build an argument here that it might also have been interpreted, this scene between the dog-headed warrior and the Varangian warrior, in a Christian framework, in a Christian mentality or view of the world. Well, let us first go to the skaldic poetry that might have been edited somehow and adapted in the King's sagas. They are written down in the 13th century, of course, but still I will see them as sources to 11th century milieu around Harald Hardrada on his travels to Kyiv and Byzantine Empire. And there you have this kind of allusions to use of legends and mythology in the Skaldic poetry. This is just some examples in bold. The young hater of the flame-red dragon square. Well, dragons do exist in legends, of course. And the harsh sport of Hildir, a Valkyrie, signifying a battle. The speeder of the battle light, the sword, and then the warrior. And the ride of Rinder, lacking bride pavement, signaling another way of expressing, calling the land, Jord, in this poem. So there is this kind of Old Norse use of Old Norse legends and mythology. Further, you have the necklace diminisher that allude to the legends of Sigurd Fánisbane, Sigurd Dragonslayer, and kind of integrates these legends in the tellings of the travels of Harald Hardrada and his followers from Scandinavia, Norway and Iceland. And also the second stanza also kind of draws on the legends of Sigurd Fánisbane. And Harald Hardrada himself is supposed to have composed poetry about his own travels. And in this stanza, he is alluding to Ellisiv herself and calling her Gerd, goddess of the gold ring in Gardarike, and how she ridicules Harald. This is, of course, an allusion to, well, Gerd in mythology is mentioned in the mythological poem Skirnismol about how Frey wanted to have Gerd and get her back to the realm of the gods. And she initially refuses. She's not very impressed by Freyr. And in the end, Freyr's messenger, Skirne, has to more or less threaten her with malign magic to get her to come to the realm of the gods. So it's kind of gamanvisor is kind of a joke in verses, entertaining verses. So it's kind of a humorous depiction of Harald's own relation to Ellisiv here. So you have this kind of Old Norse conventions, language, allusions to legends and mythology, but you have also another kind of emphasis in this poetry. And then you get more into more like a Christian framework, Christian ideology, and Christian ideas about rulership. For instance, this one by Arnor Jarlaskald that mentioned these prayers that he will do for the dealer of warriors' deaths, and that will be, the warrior will be Harald. And Harald is also the wise guardian of the Greeks and of Kyiv, Gardar. No, that's God, but Harald, the warrior, is the representation or kind of the warrior of God. Sorry. And also in Stufr Imblindi Furdarsson's poem Stufsdråpa about the travels of Harald, is also this kind of more like Christian religious rhetoric here. Here you have the king, Harald, that fights against traitors to the ruler, traitors to the emperor, but also perhaps to Harald himself. Harald is, the punisher of crimes, more like a just ruler, and he will reside forever with Christ. So here I have kind of completely different rhetoric, a much more Christian religious rhetoric around Harald and his travels and his battles And Stufer also mentioned the marriage to the ruler's daughter, and that would be Ellisiv in this context, the confidant of the people. So less legendary stuff, less mythological allusions, and more kind of Christian ruler rhetoric in this. And then we get back to this mural painting. And how can this be interpreted in a more like Christian framework related to Christian rulership? Well, you have the dog-headed creatures that are quite important in the early Middle Ages. During the whole Viking Age, at least in Europe, it is alluded to by missionaries and people who wrote about how to convert pagans, including in Scandinavia. And this is from a letter written in the late 9th century, Ratramnus of Corby, a monk who writes to Rimbert of Bremen, who wrote a biography of Ansgar, the missionary to the north, who went to even Birka in Sweden, and discusses this race of people called the Cynocephali, the dogheads, that lives at the outer rim of the world to the north, in the land of the Swedes, in this case. Are they descendants of Adam and Eve? Are they humans? Or if they have the soul of animals, are they animals or are they people? And that's very important, because if there are animals, there's no point of doing missionary works to them, because then they wouldn't be able to understand Christianity. But if they are a human race, you should do missionary work towards them. So if the Cynocephali are human, then they descend from the first man, Adam, and if they are of the race of animals, they would only take the name of humans, but do not have the nature of man. And as animals, they seem to be animals because they bark rather than talk, with their heads of a dog that are turned to the ground, while the heads of humans turn toward heaven and can understand celestial mysteries. On the other hand, you say they live in villages, work on the soil, cover their genitals, they have shame, kind of like humans. That indicates that the Cynocephali have a rational soul and can understand reason, and thus that you should do missionary work towards them. In Adam of Bremen, that wrote in the 1070s, they are also mentioned, but then not in Sweden, but further east, at Kvenuland, the Baltics, or in the eastern realms, east of kind of Christianity. And he mentioned them in connection to the Amazons. It said that when the Amazons give birth, boys will have the heads of dogs, that's the sons, while the girls become the most beautiful women, and then later on, warriors. The Cynocephali can be seen in the east as prisoners sometimes, and when they talk, it sounds like barking, so barking again. So this is a kind of difficult race, almost humans, but not quite, that are difficult to interpret and difficult to understand, even in the 11th century, by kind of prominent church individual like Adam of Bremen. But then you have one case where you have a Cynocephali that actually was converted, and that's Saint Christopher. And he was converted, he could understand reason. He believed in God in the end, but he could not speak like a man. But eventually he was baptized and he became a Christian, and he was offered, in the Western tradition, a human head. And you find also this kind of dog heads that are not converted, like Saint Christopher, that were the enemy of Christ. So this is from late 14th century, but still based on the 11th century manuscript. The enemies of Christ. And you find this also in later tradition. This is from a manuscript of the stories of Alexander the Great that went east and fought Cynocephali, the bad guys to the right there. And that might be I suggest, a more likely way of interpreting this scene, where Harald Hardrada, well, a guy who represents Harald Hardrada and the Varangians from the north, that actually are on the Christian team and fighting off the enemies of Christ, represented by the dog head. Thank you.
Professor of History at the Department of Archaeology, Conservation and History at the University of Oslo. Her presentation is titled Daughter, Wife and Queen Ellisiv in Norse Poetry and Sagas. Please, Caitlin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me okay, and I've done the microphone all right. So thank you to all of the organisers for including me in this event. So we've already heard about the external sources for Harald and Ellisiv from Sverrir in the first session. So as you can tell from my title, I will be focusing on the Norse sources from Norway and Iceland. So we have two skaldic poems, which Bjorn has already mentioned, and we have Morkinskinna and Fagerskinna and Snorri's Heimskringla. So they'll be my main sources for today. So a lot of my slides will have quite a lot of text on them, but you don't need to actually look at it if you don't want to. And there's a bit of variation in spelling of names depending on whose translation I've used or the kind of linguistic context. But unfortunately, there aren't a great deal of references to Ellisiv in our sources, so I'm probably showing you most of them, so you at least get a fairly complete picture. So in these sources, we first meet Ellisiv when Harald travelled to the court of Yaroslav, as we have heard about. And we are told that he became the commander of Yaroslav's defence forces, although it has been argued that that could be somewhat of an exaggeration. Maybe he was kind of involved in something more like kind of tax collecting or sort of border raids. Maybe it's a little bit of a over-exaggeration to give him kind of control over these forces, but that's something I guess that we can debate. Fagerskinna also explicitly notes that Yaroslav had many Norwegians with him and paid them for their services. So there is this tradition of kind of mercenary activity by Scandinavians, as we've heard. And here we have Ellisiv's status being defined by her lineage, defined as being the daughter of Yaroslav. So while at Yaroslav's court, we're told that Harald asks for Ellisiv's hand, but that Yaroslav refuses him initially, or at least temporarily he refuses him. So he kind of acknowledges that Harald is quite accomplished, that his star is rising, as it were. But just now, you have not the means for such a distinguished marriage, and for the moment, you are a landless man. Sorry, I'm just going to sort this out properly. I have too much hair. And then do it around the ears. Is that right? No. How do you do this? Yep. That makes more sense. There we go. Thank you very much. Cool. Sorry about that. I'm a medieval historian. I'm bad with technology. So, yes. So, he says that, you're not ready yet, basically. You're a landless man. So, as we've heard, Harald is in exile at this point from Norway after Stiklestad. And really, now we have the benefit of hindsight, knowing that he does become a very successful king of Norway, but maybe at that point in time that we wouldn't have been so obvious that he would be able to be so successful and kind of claim the kingdom. So of course this is the perfect kind of narrative motivation here for Harald to seek fame and fortune, to go on a campaign, to go and prove himself worthy of such a match in the way that this is depicted in the sources. Sorry, I did it the wrong way around. And so Harald is sort of then jumping forward to when Harald escapes from Constantinople and sails across the Black Sea north to Kyiv, so back back again to Yaroslav's court. So this is during this journey that he composes a number of verses, which Bjorn has already mentioned for us, the Gammelnavisa, the sort of jesting verses, which refer to various events in Harald's life, particularly his kind of military endeavours and travels. So there are several verses, and the example I've given on the slide, the second stanza refers to a voyage to Sicily, where he's part of sort of Byzantine forces invading there. So almost all of these stanzas in this poem end with the same two-line refrain, yet the girther of the gold ring, so the sort of kenning or poetic circumlocution for a woman, although as Bjorn has told us, maybe the exact choice of the name of the goddess is also kind of particularly appropriate for this context, that she ridicules me. So the saga obviously is kind of, there's the sort of prose context in which we have this verse recorded in the saga. In the saga sort of explicitly tell us that this refers to Ellisiv and to Harald's attempts to kind of woo her. And yeah, we do have other verse attributed to Harald. It's not kind of completely unusual to have verses from kings that kind of are about women, sort of in praise of women, particularly foreign women, as it happens. But I suppose the element of kind of him sort of trying to prove himself is maybe quite interesting here. But of course, the focus actually is not really on Ellisiv herself. So it's, you know, we might maybe have expected some kind of classic poetic tropes about how beautiful she was or how wise or something like that. But here really the focus is mostly on Harald and all the cool stuff that he's done. But yeah, it's quite an interesting poem. And then we have another kind of reference to Ellisiv, again, when she's not actually named explicitly, which Bjorn, wrong way around, which Bjorn has already showed us from a Stufa in Blindi, where he just sort of says, yeah, Harald successfully gains his prize from Yaroslav, so he got the marriage he desired, he took plenty of gold and the ruler's daughter. And we've obviously mentioned a little bit about the gold and the treasure already as something that Harald is then able to use to sort of leverage on his return to Norway and to Scandinavia. So if we think back to the dialogue that we have in this work that I showed at the beginning with Yaroslav, when Harald first asked for Ellisev's hand, he is still in fact landless when Yaroslav agrees for him to marry Ellisiv, but he has obviously got this greater wealth, this reputation and more followers after being in Byzantium. So perhaps the odds of him gaining land are now better than before. Additionally, by that time, Harald's half-nephew, Magnus the Good, son of Olaf Haraldsson, was ruling in Norway, so it's no longer under Danish control. So the odds are sort of better, and we've also kind of seen how many of his daughters Yaroslav kind of married off to various sort of rulers and powerful men across Europe. So this is sort of something that he is quite good at doing or does quite often. He is, of course, later known as the Wise, but that actually seems to come from much later Slavic sources, whereas in the contemporary Scandinavian sources, it's actually his wife, Ingigerda, who's known as the Wise. So Christian Raffensperger, the historian, suggests that perhaps we should attribute agency for the marital arrangements to Ingigerda rather than Yaroslav if she's the wise one. But that's obviously speculative, but just an interesting vignette to ponder. Yeah. So then we next hear of Ellisiv when Harald does return to Scandinavia. Let's hop over, there we go. From Fagerskinna, and here we have Ellisev's family network being explicitly mentioned. So Harald meets with Sven Ulfsson, or Estridsson, depending on how you know him best, the king of Denmark from the lineage of Sven Forkbeard and Knut the Great. So Sven had been at odds with Magnus the Good, but through her Swedish mother, Ellisiv connects Harald directly-ish, I'm going to show you the horrible family tree in a second, to Sven. And so then Harald and Sven, they form this alliance against Magnus initially. So Ellisev's mother, Ingigerda, the wife of Yaroslav, she is the half-sister of Sven's mother, Estrid. I tried to represent this. So the daughter of Sven Forkbeard. So it's a little bit complicated. But I suppose the main thing is to point out that Harald's marriage to Ellisiv is not just kind of providing him the sort of foreign connections, these connections to Rus and to Kyiv, but it is actually simultaneously also improving his standing within Scandinavia as well in this sort of Scandinavian context. So unfortunately, we hear very little of Ellisev's life once she's actually in Norway. Once Harald does gain the kingship, so initially he's sharing the kingship with Magnus, with his half-nephew, until Magnus kind of conveniently dies and leaves Harald as the kind of last one standing and sole king of Norway. So obviously a move to a new land could of course be daunting. Well, we heard from David that maybe she might have not been as impressed in comparison to what she was used to. So it could of course be daunting, but in other ways it is of course what women, elite women, would be brought up to expect their whole lives, that they would be kind of married off and used to form alliances and so on. And as we heard at the very beginning, there's probably bilingualism in the court at Kyiv, so there probably would have been some Norse competency anyway, given its origin and its continued connections to Scandinavia, but especially with Ellisev's mother being Swedish, we can sort of presumably think that she would have ensured that her daughter, spoke good Old Norse. So we would hope, therefore, that communication wouldn't be particularly an issue. We should also maybe remember that royal women sort of being married off into a new land, they usually don't just travel all alone. So they usually would have a few people with them, kind of be accompanied by a handful of companions or sort of servants, maybe other women perhaps. And yeah, as we sort of thought about a little bit in the question period to the first session, we don't know where in Norway Ellisiv would have been. Explicitly, it's not mentioned, but the sagas talk about Harald spending a lot of time in Trondheim and in Oslo, so presumably she would have accompanied him at least part of the time. Perhaps we might even imagine Harald performing his own kind of jesting verses about how he won his queen to try and kind of raise a smile in front of those in the feasting hall, maybe, assuming she could take the joke, I suppose. And as has been mentioned, Ellisiv is explicitly referred to as drottning or queen in our Old Norse sources, so modern Norwegian dronning, which is not true of all kings' wives in Norway in this period. We do have some examples of queens in this period from the kind of North Sea world who wielded considerable influence. So the classic example of this would be Emma of Normandy, the wife of Ethelred and then Canute after the Danish invasion of England. So that's a contemporary manuscript there showing Canute and Emma. And it's quite striking and unusual because, we have the portrait of the king and the queen together, sort of stood side by side, kind of acting together. They are kind of donating a cross, a very large, impressive cross, to a religious institution. Emma's position is probably unusual because she's sort of already been Queen of England, so she's sort of extra beneficial to Canute when he takes over, so she maybe is somewhat exceptional. But just trying to think a little bit about what do queens do in this period. Donations to the church, it does seem to be something that would be kind of expected, that they should show that they are pious, and so forth. The sagas obviously tell us that Harald is involved in church building himself, particularly at Nidaros or Trondheim, and that he greatly strengthened the church overall, and we know that he benefits greatly from the cult of his half-brother, of St. Olaf den Hellige. So I would suggest that Ellisiv might have been involved in some of these gifts, or maybe present when some of this occurs, although this is all very, very speculative. So medieval sources are often quiet when it comes to women, unfortunately. In a recent study, Marcus Mindreber also noted that women feature less in the king sagas, which deal with what he terms adventurer kings, so in reigns that involve extensive military expeditions abroad, including long-term conflicts of sort of expansion, that the accounts of these kings in the sagas are more dominated by men, and that women are sort of restricted, obviously, from taking part in this kind of active full-scale warfare. So that might also be another reason why we don't have as many references to Ellisiv as we might like. Ellisiv bore 2 daughters to Harald, according to the sagas. So one is named Ingigerd, after her own mother, and we have Maria as well, but there's no sons. And if she had had sons, I'm sure that would have obviously increased her importance, particularly in the long run. So the other place that we often would see women referred to in the sagas is how important they are in the kinship network, particularly if there ends up being a potential succession dispute between rival candidates. We hear of mothers therefore supporting the claims of their sons, and maybe being able to wield some influence that way as well. And that is related to the other reason for a possible comparative lack of references to Ellisiv, the other woman, who we have not mentioned so far today, I don't think. So after the death of his co-ruler Magnus the Good, according to the sagas, Harald takes another wife. So she is the mother of Harald's 2 sons. She is the mother of Magnus and Olav, later Olav Fedir, from whom later Norwegian kings are descended. So we could say that she might have more been a mistress or a concubine, but even if that's the case, it doesn't seem to have had the same negative connotations in this period as it sort of sounds like it does today in kind of modern English. It still seems to have given such women considerable social advancement. So I mentioned Knut and Emma a moment ago. Knut also has a second wife, so it's not kind of so uncommon in this period. He had this other wife, Alfgifu, but Emma then becomes more useful to him. So Harald choosing to marry Thorda seems to sort of strengthen his position in Norway. And this is a point, we're already long past him kind of switching allegiances from Sven Estridsson of Denmark, from Ellisev's relative, to Magnus, but then, as I mentioned, sort of outliving him as being the sole king of Norway. So maybe these marrying a Norwegian woman might also have kind of been useful to him in this new situation. So as well as being the mother of kings, this Tora, she's from an important Norwegian aristocratic family, the Arnesons. So we hear quite a lot about her kind of uncles in the sagas, about Finn Arneson and Kalfa Arneson. They sort of tell several stories about them. They're also claiming descent from a kind of a royal figure kind of back in the day. And this family are more relevant to Icelanders, and of course we need to remember that our saga sources are mostly coming from Iceland and not actually from Norway itself. So Tora's sister, Jordan, she's married to an important Icelander, Ulfr Ospaksson, who Harald had made his marshal, so given a kind of important position in the court, as well as, therefore he's sort of linking Ulfr to him into his family, kind of through marriage. So Fagerskine list this marriage, as one of the mementos that Icelanders had of Harald, along with some very fine gifts that he would give them when they would go to visit him in Norway. And Ulfr's descendants continue to be of high standing in Iceland. So I think that might also maybe be another reason why we get a little bit less about Ellisiv, although it's not completely surprising. As I mentioned, often we don't hear as much about the women as we might like. But despite there being this other woman, the mother of the 2 sons, Ellisiv does not seem to be kind of put aside by Harald in the saga narratives. And indeed, she returns to the stage in the momentous year of 1066, when, as we know, Harald launched his attempted invasion of England, which ultimately failed when he met his end at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. So Harald plans this invasion. He gathers his fleet in Trondheimsfjord, and he makes sure that his eldest son is accepted as king before he leaves. It's sensible, make sure that the succession is secured. He takes his younger son with him. Not particularly uncommon, perhaps, sort of make sure that they get a bit of training. That's something that Sven Forkbeard does with Knut on the Danish invasion of England. But interestingly, we are told in Heimskringla that he takes Ellisiv and their daughters with him. Fagerskine agrees with Heimskringla. Morkeskine actually says it was Thorda, so says it was the other wife that he took with him. So first, Harald sails to the Northern Isles, and the red arrow on my crude map. So that obviously makes sense when you're sailing from Norway. That's kind of the first land that you would hit. And then it means you can kind of pause and sort of resupply before sailing south kind of down the east coast of Scotland and northern England, where he wins the one battle after his first landfall, but then famously killed at Stamford Bridge by the forces of Harald Godwinson. Stopping in Orkney also enabled Harald to gather reinforcements from the earldom of Orkney, which had kind of close ties to the Norwegian kings. So the sagas tell us that Harald left his queen and their daughters kind of safely in Orkney, while he kind of continues his voyage down south. So, sorry, 1 second. What was I saying? Yeah. As I said, it's kind of common maybe for him to take the younger son with him on this kind of military expedition, on a kind of invasion attempt. But having the queen and the princesses there for part of the journey does seem kind of quite unusual. Perhaps Harald was so confident of victory that he hoped he would be able to kind of then quickly fetch his queen to join him in England, to take up position alongside him. Perhaps he thought his daughters were useful bargaining chips. Perhaps he was going to do what Jaroslav had been so good at doing, and maybe offer them in marriage to forge alliances. Maybe he could have offered one of them to the sons of the Earl of Orkney in return for their aid in the invasion, or to make new alliances in England with an English noble. If he had been successful, he would have needed to shore up his position in England, of course. And so assuming it was Ellisiv who waited in Orkney, it might actually have been a bit odd for her, because the other woman, the second wife, Thora, she is related to the Earls of Orkney in various complicated ways that you don't quite need to worry about. But there's Thorfinn, circled in red, the Earl of Orkney, Thorfinn the Mighty. And she surely would have remained at the Earl's residence on the Broch of Bursay. Ignore the modern ferry lines on the map. This was just a reasonable representation I could find. So the move to Kirkwall is obviously a later thing. So the Broch of Bursay is the capital at this point. So after the Battle of Stamford Bridge, Harald Godwinson allows Harold's son, Olaf Scherer, and the sons of the Earls of Orkney, and all the remnants of the Norwegian fleet to kind of leave in peace. So they return to Orkney. Ellisiv must surely have been kind of anxiously awaiting the news of the outcome of all of these battles for the throne of England. According to the saga narrative, their daughter Maria died on the same day that Harold died in England, because they sort of had such a strong connection. So everyone had to remain in Orkney over the winter, because of course the weather conditions make winter voyages more hazardous. So then they had to wait all that time before they could return to Norway in the spring. And she must have kind of had some uncertainty maybe about her fate after this, and now her husband is dead. And unfortunately, as far as I can tell, we don't know what happened to her. We don't know what she did after they sailed back to Norway. If she stayed in Norway, maybe remarried a Norwegian landowner, she still would have been kind of valuable for that connection to the royal family, or if she kind of returned to Kyiv or somewhere else. So, just to kind of wrap up, so Ellisiv seems to be somewhat kind of defined by the men in her life, in these accounts, at least in the narratives that we have. First as the daughter of Jaroslav, and then, of course, as the wife of Harald. But the kinship network that she's tapped into through her mother is also important, particularly on the Scandinavian stage. Harold's reputation is enhanced by winning her, as shown by the references in the more contemporary Skaldic verse. It all seems to be part of proving his suitability as a future king of Norway, certainly in the saga narratives, in the way that they're presenting it, but likely in reality too. The fact that he has kind of gained this international reputation and has these links to Rus can only sort of reflect well on him. We can only really speculate about her time as Queen of Norway, though, as I said, being accorded the title at all is still sort of fairly significant. So she obviously was deemed as being of higher status than the other woman, than Thora, because she isn't given the same title. And I think there's various reasons why we don't hear as much about her in the sagas, in our Norse sources, as we would like. But if we believe the majority of the saga accounts and say that we could see that Harald valued her enough to take her with him on his kind of most ambitious endeavour yet, even though it would all come to naught. So, thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin, for very interesting. Thank you very much. And our last presenter for today, Dr. Natalia Hamaika. She is a researcher at the Institute of Archaeology of the National Academy of Science of Ukraine and the Leibniz Institute for the History and Culture of Eastern Europe. Her talk is Between Kyiv and the Fjords, Networks Linking Rus and Scandinavia in the 11th-12th century. Please, Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, I'm very glad to be here and to present my presentation dedicated to Kyiv, because it is remarkable now for different senses, and of course for the archaeology, because I'm an archaeologist and want to show you some beautiful pictures as well. So how it works, like this, yes? Mm-hmm. Let's start. Kyiv can be described as a true medieval metropolis. Straightforward comparison with other contemporary cities reveals that it exceeds the scale of ordinary fortified settlements. By the late 10th century, the city was undergoing rapid development, and specialists estimate its population during 11th century at around 50,000 inhabitants, a remarkable figure for the medieval period. From its very beginning, Kyiv exhibits distinctly international traits in its material culture. One burial, for instance, contains artifacts of Byzantine, Hungarian, Scandinavian, and Eastern origin. Situated at the crossroads of two major trade routes, from the Varangians to the Greeks and the Via Regia, Kyiv was ideally positioned to accumulate material evidence of long-distance exchange. Its location on the very border between forest and steppe inevitably brought it into constant contact with nomadic groups. It should be emphasized that these interactions were not limited to trade alone, but often involved warfare. The city of Kyiv occupies two markedly different topographical zones. One situated, is it work? Yes, one situated on the hills, and another one, big part, is situated on the lower part, Podil. David talked a lot about it, but I want to look your focus on this part, that is yellow line mark the modern city of Kyiv, and that is medieval city of Kyiv. And that is very important to understand that here it is the river Dnipro, and here it is the river Desna. And we have the situation where two big rivers conflude together, and then we have this beautiful stratigraphy. The area located within the floodplain is known as the Podil, an early Rus name literally meaning the lower place. Geomorphologically, it was formed between the late 9th and the turn of the 10th to 11th centuries. I just described it. Wait, sorry. So here it is. The eldest part under the Zhitny market, and here it is the next, which is include the very early begin of Podil district, that is the very end of 9th century. And next line is, here it is, that is the first half of 10th century. Here it is the middle 10th century, and here it is the end of 10th century. So we have a unique situation when this historical district was formed, geographically formed, in the period of Old Rus. And we have this beautiful stratigraphy which helps us to date these beautiful layers very, very good, because we can, of course, understand that this layer is older than this one, of course. We have also different possibility to date it more precise because of different kind of investigation, dendrochronology, C14 and remarkable finds, for example, and so on. But we have this situation when not only the floodplain formed Podil, but also the streams from these hills form this cone and preserve the layers from floodplain with more stable clay layers streaming from the hills. Next one. In ecological meaning, it is indeed the richest city in Eastern Europe, containing not only an abundance of ordinary domestic finds, but also a remarkable variety of imported goods from many regions of medieval world. For example, that is one excavation at Spasska Street, which shows us different, absolutely different ties with Byzantium or Orient world, as well, and with Carpathian region, with Germany, for example, and of course Rus, that is the seal of Russian queen, the wife of Vsevolod. Among the most common imported goods from Byzantium in the 11th and 12th centuries were wine and olive oil, both transported in amphora. Numerous finds of such vessels have been recorded not only across the territory of Rus, but also as far north as Scandinavia. And one of them is deposited in the exhibition of this beautiful museum. This links the two ends of the very famous route from the Greeks to Varangians. Oh, sorry, that was the amphora. Excuse me, please. Which shows us the really huge amount of finds of this kind of vessels, and this part of around Kyiv is accumulated probably the most amount of these vessels as well. Excavation conducted between 2007 and 2011 in Kyiv's Podil district uncovered the remains of 3 estates that vividly focus on the Scandinavian direction of Kyiv connection. It is situated just close to the river Dnipro, and we have 3 estates here. One that is the plats, wooden plats, and one is excavated on the whole white, but the 2 are another on the small parts. For example, the well-known Scandinavian board game Hnefatafl is well known in the archaeological records of 10th century Rus. During this period, it appears primarily at sites directly associated with trade routes and the emporia located along them. Later, however, the game disappears from the archaeological assemblages, but not in Kyiv. Gaming pieces for Hnefatafl made of walrus ivory, here it is, and replicated in antler, were discovered in the aforementioned estates of Kyiv-Podil, dating to the 12th century. Typologically, they correspond fully to finds from Scandinavian territories. Moreover, the bottom of the pieces features small holes intended for pegs. Here it is, here, here, here. These pegs secured the pieces to the board, preventing them from sliding off during play. It is believed that such sets were particularly convenient for use during travels or military campaigns. And, of course, this was mentioned in Gretti's saga as figures, pieces with big pegs. Not only gaming pieces made of walrus ivory were discovered, but also walrus skulls themselves, an exceptional find for Kyiv. Precious ivory was transported in pairs together with the front part of the skull. Here it is. Specialized analysis, including DNA and stable isotope studies conducted in collaboration with a team from the University of Trondheim, revealed that most of these walruses originated from the Western Atlantic, some 4,000 kilometers away from Kyiv. Further examination using the chain operator approach demonstrated that part of these skulls had been preceded for transport in the Norwegian manner. To date, 10 skulls have been identified in Kyiv, the third largest assemblage after Bergen and Schleswig, where 15 specimens have been found respectively. The unique stratigraphy of Kyiv-Podil fortunately allows archaeologists not only to date the cultural layers with great precision, but also to discover exceptionally well-preserved organic materials in the lower levels, including leather, wood, and textile. This preservation was made possible by the presence of a dense stratum horizon 14. Here it is, a big black horizon, which is correspond to the time of Yaroslav the Wise, to the 2040th year of 11th century. Among the finds, particular attention is drawn to several rowlocks, wooden fitting from boats that were fastened to the hulls with rivets. These rivets are not very beautiful finds, but it is very remarkable because they are common to the whole world where this type of boats were used. The description of the route from the Varangian to the Greeks, known from the account of Constantine Porphyrogenitus, includes details of how the gout boats were prepared in various parts of Rus and then, in spring, floated down to Kyiv. There they were fitted with raised sides to continue their journey toward Byzantium. Archaeological finds of both dugouts and Scandinavian tugboats support this account, and their reconstruction are shown in the accompanying photographs. And here it is, typical dugout without any special features for having these odds, but here it is, the no-stop boat, and what we can see this type of features. Rowlocks, such as those discovered in Kyiv-Podil, serve to secure the stabilized oars during rowing. While simple dugout boats lacked such fittings, larger vessels invariably included them as functional components of their construction. The most compelling evidence not only of Kyiv's connection with Scandinavia through trade, but also of the direct presence of Scandinavians in the city during the 11th century is provided by the discovery of runic inscriptions. These finds, dated to the 20th, 40th years of 11th century, coincide with the reign of Yaroslav the Wise. One inscription contains the reversed initial letter of the runic alphabets, And another simply reads "Won." The presence of such inscriptions clearly indicates that the people living here were familiar with runic literacy and capable to both reading and writing it. Moreover, several amphora bearing such kind of inscriptions serve a literal embodiment of the phrase "from Varangians to the Greeks" and "back from the Greeks to Varangians," vividly illustrating their bidirectional nature of this trade route. Among the finds from Fedir are not only genuine runic inscription, but also a rune-like sign carved on the lid of wooden barrel. Such signs were previously known from the northern region of Rus and Scandinavia, yet their discovery in Kyiv demonstrates that this tradition was also present in the city. And drawing to the conclusion, we need to mention that this strong connection between Rus and Scandinavia, between Kyiv and Scandinavia, was not ended not in the 10th century, not even in the early 11th century, but continued in the 12th century as well. Archaeological research reveals that Kyiv was a really important city to this transcontinental ties between different parts of world, because mentioned here, Warlost ivory, for example, was founded not only in the Rus, but also in the Byzantium, but also in the other part of world, transported from the Greenland to Kyiv and further to the east and to the south. It was a beautiful sign of this transcontinental connections. And moreover, we need to understood that not only the trade connection was in focus, but also the people who still lived in Kyiv in 10th century. It is very important to understand that that was a vividly connected to Scandinavia by different way of life. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for all our speakers. Now we can open floor for questions and discussion, and I see that we have already one question. Please wait for the microphone. Yes, please.
Yes, hello. My name is Tore Wallaker, and I have a question regarding Harald's proposal to marry Elisaveta. As I was told earlier today, she was probably maybe born around 1025. Am I not mistaken? And since Harald was, he took her to Norway in 1044, she was probably 19 at that time. But the first time he proposed, wasn't that when he came to Kyiv before he traveled around in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea and so on, and he was in the service of the emperor around 9 years. So that was probably, he was probably then proposing to marry Elisaveta when she was around 9-10 years old. So could that also have been some consideration that Jaroslav said it's not the right time?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so it's not something that is mentioned in the sagas, but as you say, yeah, it's sort of quite striking to us, and I think a couple of historians have commented on it in the past. So it may well be that, yeah, the whole kind of scene of the marriage proposal is just sort of, yeah, for entertainment, is just sort of fictional. I suppose at the same time, young girls were often kind of married off at an age that we would feel uncomfortable with now, or at least that plans could maybe be made at an earlier point if people are thinking in a very long term for this type of diplomacy. So, but as you say, yeah, maybe that would also then affect the timing. But it obviously it's a better story, I suppose, in the saga for it to just be that he needs to go and prove himself and win all this fame and renown. And we have similar stories, I guess, for other Norwegian kings. So Olaf Tryggvason marrying this English woman Gyða. There's often this sort of trope that they kind of have to win a woman somehow or compete with other men to win this woman, and that kind of proves that they're better than everybody else, and that therefore they deserve to be king. But yeah, no, it's a good point. Thank you. Do you have anything else on?
Well, I look at Sverrir because in his talk he mentioned the attack of the Rus on Constantinople in 1043, and that you see a connection to the marriage in the year after and 45. So I think maybe Sverrir would be better to give a response, perhaps, if you want. No.
Well, it's clearly just a second of scene in Morkinskinna. He knows that Harald later married Ellisiv, so he's just setting a good scene for this proposal. I think we shouldn't take it too literally. Okay. Which I said already. Morkinskinna. The author had a few facts, and then the author writes about we don't know who the author is, but they write about these facts and make all sorts of stories. I will again mention the dragon. That may not have happened.
It has worked, just put it past.
Yes, no, thank you. I enjoyed those. I enjoyed all of your talks very much. I have a comment and also questions that come from that comment. One thing that strikes me is that we have a very modern mindset. Part of that mindset is something that I perhaps alluded to a little bit, is that the question of choice. So like today we have choice. We have more choice than I think people have, certainly in the Western world, people have ever had previously. And particularly your talk on Ellisiv, Caitlin, she really didn't have any choices in the sense that we would call. She couldn't make any choices over her own destiny. And the question you made about the other woman, and the point that you also made by the fact that she only provided daughters. And then there's also the potentially destabilizing question of what happens to royal succession if you don't have clear and obvious sons. All of these things can throw society, or certainly the politics, into a chaotic situation after a king's passing or a ruler's passing. I'm just wondering whether our modern mindsets really aren't the best mindsets to understand this medieval world, when we think it's a great shame that Harald finds the other woman, when perhaps it might just have been the most logical thing to do in order to provide sons. That was my question to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I don't think I was trying to imply that she did have a lot of choice over her life. I suppose the only time that maybe she would have had a lot of choices as a widow, because often that was the only time that elite women could have a bit more of a say in their own destiny, when they're older and established and a widow, rather than, as you say, being maybe controlled by your father. And yeah, as I said, we obviously have other examples of kings and elite men who have multiple wives or partners, or however we might try to term that. So yeah, it maybe isn't necessarily something that, as you say, would have been seen as a problem at the time. But I suppose part of what I was trying to say was that if she had sons, I think then we would just have more information about her, because, as you say, if there's instability or there's multiple claimants, then there's that kind of jostle for power that is something that saga authors love, right? It's good story kind of fodder. So then I think we maybe would get more references to women, kind of, or in other equivalent situations, we get more references to the women and the mothers kind of having to vouch for for perhaps the child's legitimacy, or just why they should be king, and kind of just playing more of an active role maybe. But yeah, she doesn't get to have that chance, I suppose. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else.
Thank you for question and answers. Please, we have one more.
Well, it's not really a comment for Caitlin because we have already discussed this on a previous occasion, but there's also the possibility that the saga authors didn't know about the expedition of 1058 to England, which was led by King Harald's son Magnus. So they assume that Magnus is born after Harald returns to Norway, but then he would have led the expedition at a very young age. So there is also the possibility that Magnus was in fact older, and the Harald's relationship with Thora is older, and then it is not a token of disrespect to Ellisiv. If he already had the sons with Thora before, he was not planning to return to Norway. So if Thora had been his companion before, Ellisiv is still quite honored as a queen, and maybe if she had had sons, they would have been preferred to Magnus and Olavur. They were quite fortunate in that. Olavur, Magnus was only king for one year anyway, but Olavur was quite fortunate that Harald and Ellisiv didn't have sons, I think. So that's another possibility. Of course, we don't know anything about this.
Thank you for this comment. Do we have more questions?
If I may.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I will use the opportunity. So you mentioned Ellisiv most likely participated with Harald in some donations, philanthropy to the church. Do we know something what exactly they have done together?
Yeah, no, that was just very speculative on my part, I suppose, was just to try and give people a sense of what we might ordinarily expect queens to do. So sort of by comparison with other situations where we have a bit more evidence. So from England, for example, we just have more contemporary written sources. So yeah, it was purely speculative on my part, but I suppose, yeah, particularly maybe for Harald, given that he has such a reputation for kind of being involved in the church, and obviously, he benefits from it by being the half brother of a saint, and that really sort of strengthens the royal dynasty. But it was partly an imaginative exercise of sort of imagining that's the sort of thing that you would want the queen to be there for if there's a big kind of ceremony and a kind of donation thing happening. But yeah, unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, unless someone suddenly finds some little hidden document somewhere, not something that we can say anything concrete about.
Well, there is, of course, the kind of hint that the daughter is called Mary. I think that's the first one in Norway, and that it's from mid 11th century that you find churches devoted to the Virgin Mary that might be influenced by Ellisiv as much as being a choice of King Harald. So might be, but again, there's so much we don't know.
Thank you for question. Let's not use it. Thank you very much. We have one more question, please.
Thank you very much. A question to Professor Carmichael concerning the excavations in Kyiv. As far as I understand, you mentioned, or you said that Scandinavian content identifiable until the end of the 10th century. What happens next? Is Scandinavian artifacts or content lost? I mean, it's empty. Are these trade relations broken or diminished in any way? And if you could also comment on relations with Kyiv's western neighbors, primarily Hungary, Poland, maybe even in Germany or the Germans. How is the dynamics between these powers in the Middle Ages of this time?
Okay, thank you very much for this very important and interesting question. Let's say when we are speaking about the this chronological progression. So in the 10th century, probably from the very late 9th century and during the 10th century, we have a lot of strong Scandinavian evidences in Rus. Fedir and Androshchuk told about this more widely. But I am focuses on this part of Podil, which were discovered because in the previous time, before this excavation, we didn't know about this strong connection to Scandinavia. We know about the so-called Varangian estates in Novgorod, but we didn't know about it, the same Scandinavian or Varangian estates in Kyiv, but now we know about this. And probably that was some kind of part of I don't know, merchants who lived there and had really a strong connection to Scandinavia, as well as they used in their ordinary life runic alphabet. It is quite remarkable, I think. But it is not a very common situation in let's say in the mid of 11th century up to the early 13th century. That is not a very common situation for the Rus area. But Kyiv is not a Rus. Kyiv is a great trade hub for this period. Kyiv is a really remarkable place because we suppose that up to the late 11th century it is a major city in the region, and only from the very late 11th century and in the 12th century, different cities from the different part of Rus arise as well as Kyiv, and they became their own ties with different trade directions, included Scandinavia, Byzantium, Western Europe, and so on. But Kyiv really a richest in ecological meaning, the richest place. And we have these strongly connections with different parts of worlds during the whole period until the Mongol invasion, when this Mongol invasion stopped this very active connection with other world. That is.
Thank you. And we have a question from David, please. Fine, okay. One more question, we still have time. Please.
Yes, my name is Ingrid Sörby. I just noticed in Ukraine there is a big set of stamps from some years ago portraying all the daughters of, your kingdom houses who were becoming queens in other states. And there's also a book about Ellisiv, and there she, in both these examples, she's portrayed as Koroleva dwóch держав, like of two states, because there is in the sagas that she also remarried in Denmark, I think within Svein Estridsson or something. Is this now like the official version, or is it just considered like the Queen of Norway, or Norwegian Tadani?
Actually, I'm not very specialized on this because I'm an archaeologist, and we have not found any passport with some features of this. But I need to say that in archaeology and the history, of course, in archaeology moreover, but sometimes it changes strongly our understanding of past. And of course, it could be possible because we have different evidences of, and we discovered different type of archaeological finds. For example, I shown one seal belongs to the Queen Marina, which name is known only from this seal. But this woman, it's not connected to Ellisiv at all, but it's connected to the woman position in the medieval world. And it is also very important because we have the same seals from Chernihiv and the same seals from Bratislava. And it is connected to the other story, to the woman who was given in the Germany, and then it has very bad history and returned to the Rus, but it is. It could be discovered also in the archaeological meaning. I mean,
thank you. And we have, yes, please.
Yeah, is the question about Ellisiv, if she remarried a Danish king, Sven Estridsen, for example. That is not in the written sources, so I wouldn't say that that's an official version, at least Scandinavia. I think that's a conflation with another Princess Malmfrid, I think, yeah, early 12th century, that first was married to a Norwegian king and then remarried, yeah. So that's another interesting story, but not Ellisiv.
Thank you for this comment, Björn. And we have time for one more question. Please.
My name is Synnøve Winstrøg, and I'm just kind of trying to sum up what I understand from what you've said about the Kyiv situation and the Scandinavian situation, because there seems not to be equality in a way. We have these, take the Norwegian kings, who are kings by, they don't even have a town to come from. They are kings by traveling around. And they come down to a more established state, actually. And what are their qualifications? Why can this man marry someone like King Jaroslav's daughter? And I'm thinking what they have is being able to fight, strong fighters. And they also have dirhams, they have values, silver, whatever it is. Because as it seems to me, it's, I don't quite understand when Kyiv is established, what time you consider, and how far advanced it is from that point of view. It's two very, very different parts on the scene. And how is the interplay actually developing?
Thank you. Please, Natalia.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting question. Thank you very much. First of all, Kyiv arises as a capital from the very late 9th century. And for the 10th century, it is a very important place. But its really great rise started in the 11th century with the era of Yaroslav the Wise. He was really a great builder, and Kyiv became a really huge population. And why Ellisiv married Harald? Probably he was a handsome man, I don't know. But I think probably it was a love, because everybody knows this beautiful poem dedicated to Ellisiv. It's beautiful, of course, but probably it was a romantic story. But I think Kyiv, for its early period of development, has really a strong connection to Scandinavia, and probably it was important to have these relationships with Scandinavia, because we have spoken today about these Varangians in our primary chronicle, And up to the middle 11th century, we have this name Varangians each time. Varangians, 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 something other than Rus people, something other than Slav tribes. Ethnicity, I don't know if it is a question of ethnicity, but probably the question of where you came from. And really, it was very important to have this strong army which could help you in any case you want. So probably that was political decision. I don't know actually, because we have no evidences for this, but probably that was.
Thank you. Does anyone want to comment also?
Yeah, I suppose only quickly that it is something that has worked for Norwegian kings before, to go abroad raiding and then come back and get power, even though they don't necessarily have the best dynastic claim. So both Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf, okay, they go west instead of east, but it's sort of the same dynamic. So I think it wasn't beyond the realms of possibility. So it maybe made sense for Yaroslav to take that kind of gamble, perhaps.
So, thank you all for your engaging comments and questions. Let's give one warm round of applause to our speakers. I assume everyone noticed this amazing piece of art, and I want to invite Ukrainian artists who made this piece of art, please. Olena Abasinova, let's come to us and just tell us. Yes, please. Maybe it's better to have a microphone.
Yes. Hello? Yeah, so I'm very glad to stay here and to be on that conference and to see all of you and to tell a bit about that picture that tema that interested me very much. First of all, I'm a Ukrainian Norwegian artist. I live in Norway since 2008, and I'm the member of Norwegian art organization. Last 10 years I live in Kongsvinger, and where I began to study medieval history of Norway. As an artist, I'm working in a different direction of contemporary art, but that type of art, I was in love from the childhood. I'm from a creative family. From the childhood, I was in love to art of the manuscript, to medieval art. So if I get opportunity to go with my head into the story of that beautiful period, I did it. So on the picture, as we have all talked today, there are three important figures that connected Ukraine to Norway. And the key I used, that is the original. And the key is like one of the symbols that connected these two countries, two cultures. Here we talk about Sophia Cathedral. The drawing of 2037 inspired me to paint that old Sophia Cathedral that was built in the Byzantine style. We can see Golden Gate. We see a part of the beautiful ornaments of Sophia Cathedral. On that side, we see some ornaments, Scandinavian ornaments, and we have seen today twice, I think, the mural painting of Ellisiv on that cathedral, and she came out exactly like she depicted on that fresco. She came out with that candle to the Scandinavian world, to the Norway, to bring the light from the Christian land to the still pagan land. the drop of that light of that candle is dropping to the roof of the Mariakyrka. And there are some other symbols, coins of the Yaroslav period and Harald Hardrada. We can see also a foot of dragon that shows that, in my mind, that story still has a dragon foot. The story has its own history already. It was, together with another historical picture, was exposed in the National Museum in 2022 and in many other places where I had opportunity to tell the history about this historical important person. Thank you.
Thank you, Olena, and now we are going to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Svetlana, and thank you for the panel. We are asking the other three panelists to please come up to the front, and we will get some chairs for you. So meditate for 1 minute or possibly 2 while this is happening.
Not to share all microphones. Thank you so much. Because after speaking, you know, it's always
How's the meditation going? Thank you, everybody, for coming here today, and thank you, everybody, for the wonderful arrangements. Yeah, this microphone picks up also what comes out of the loudspeaker I discovered while I was standing here earlier. We have today heard about Ellisiv, a Kievan princess who became Queen of Norway, as we heard now many times. But we also learned that she's only the top of the iceberg, if you permit the expression, which is probably entirely inappropriate for the context. She's a single symptom of the multiple and manifold instances of connections between Ukraine and Norway, or maybe we should say Scandinavia, during the early Middle Ages, during the Viking Age and thereabouts. So we are going to have a panel discussion now, where we invited our distinguished guests to discuss these connections. We should maybe start with the fact that today is the day when a public monument to Ellisiv for the first time will be visible in Norway, or I believe in any Western country. Is there a monument to her in Kyiv? No. So the first one ever, which makes me wonder about the standing of not just Ellisiv, but let's start with her, in the knowledge of the general public, as it were. How well known is she? How well known are these connections that go back hundreds and hundreds of years between Norway and Ukraine? I started today by looking up in the official register of Norwegian addresses that the post office is publishing on their website. And I found out that there is a single street called Ellisiv's gate, Ellisiv Street in Norway. I will give 10 kroner to anybody who can guess in which town. Well, right commune, right. But what is the rest of the mail address? Hafrsfjord. So the place otherwise associated with Harald Hårfagre, not Harald Hardrada. But I buy you a cup of coffee sometime. Harald Hardrada, of course, has many more places called after himself, including Harald Hardrada's Plass here in Oslo, where the monument to Ellisiv will be seen today, or from today. So there are at least people who live on, I think, 14 different numbers on Ellisiv's gate in Hafrsfjord, Stavanger kommune, who know very well who she was, I hope. I know at least, I mean, I live on Oscar Wisting's Way. I know he was the second man at the South Pole. So why am I moving in on the street with the second, the guy who came second? It got his name from. But what I would like to ask the panel about, for starters, is to reflect on how well known is Ellisiv in Ukraine, in Norway. How well known are the connections during the early Middle Ages between Norway and Ukraine, or between Sweden and Ukraine, as some of us are maybe more familiar with. How well known are these to the general public? Are these things that people already know? Or are events like today's event something that is really necessary that we who have done scholarship on this do more of? Who would like to start? Please, Fedir.
Well, I think, both Ellisiv and Harald Hardrada, they are kind of both symbolic individuals who actually characterize a very interesting time, I think, because even we can't say much about Ellisiv, as you understand, and I think it's quite. There are a lot of issues about Harald Hardrada. When I was working on a book about Harald Hardrada, so it became a book about the time in which Harald lived, but because quite a lot of very problematic sources, and it's very difficult to deal with them. And of course, I think it's important to, in any way, took these two historical individuals as touch points as like kind of symbols of a great time, which actually show that people have been traveling in both directions, and they have received some inspiration. We can see this in artifacts which have been actually a kind of local interpretation of ideas and the policies they have been getting in Byzantium or Rus, and then they are trying to make this on their own plan. So I think actually there are quite a lot of levels which we can actually discuss. It's not just sagas, Skaldic poetry and archaeology, but there is also church history and paintings, and I mean, it's interesting to see the links, how arts actually, what arts, the history of arts can tell us about the context between the Scandinavia and the Rus. So I think there are quite a lot of different spheres which can be explored in the future. And of course, we as scholars, it's also a kind of our task to popularize, I mean, to make this knowledge well spread, and not just, to write about very narrow scientific issues. And even if we do know actually that there are some issues which very, very complicated, I mean, to draw large conclusions, but I think it's important to tell about this interesting time. And I think there are quite a lot of sources which we actually can contribute to our knowledge about this.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
Okay, I want to continue, and what now people in Ukraine know about Ellisiv. I don't know about the very wide auditory, but about the people who are interested in history. Everybody knows about Ellisiv because everybody knows about the daughters of Yaroslav the Wise who were given to other countries. It is very popular thematic for lovers of history. But what we actually know about Ellisiv, that is a question which can arise during understanding the place of woman in medieval society. Because, for instance, for Russian history and for medieval history as well, men were more important. And true, sad but true. And we have only few mentioned in our chronicle the names of daughters of Russian kings or wives of Russian kings, because they named after his father or after her father or after her husband. We have beautiful example, not about Ellisiv, but about the wife of Vsevolod, which was mentioned in the Sofia graffiti in Sofia Kyivskaya. That was a unique situation when women bought the land, very important land, because it was mentioned on the wall of Sofia, St. Sophia in Kyiv. And 12 priests were wisdoms. So it was very important. And what do you think about the name of this beautiful woman? That was the wife of Vsevolod, Knyaginya Vsevolozha. It was mentioned like a wife of Vsevolod. So it was not important to have their own names in the medieval world for women. It was very important to whom she belongs in the moment, to father or to husband. It was. But it is a unique situation when we have these names, and in the case with Ellisiv, it is very important to understand what we have in this case. We have, is Ellisiv a true name? I hope that is. In Ukrainian pronunciation, it is Olizava. It is very, beautiful name and very popular among the lovers of history, and it is more romantic for a moment than it was in medieval time, but we need to be clear about the situation. So that was medieval time, that was other time as we understand the society, but it was. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, David.
Yes, thank you for that, Natalia. I think it's quite ironic. I did have a little bit of optimism earlier when the historians and the theologists were discussing whether she actually existed. And you've now come out with that wonderful little fact that she might not have been called Ellisiv, because whilst we've been sitting here today, a statue has been raised to a person who might not be called Ellisiv and who might not even have existed. So I think that would be wonderfully ironic, but of course I'm being frivolous and making a joke. But
I think even us historians do think that she existed. Right, Sverrir and Caitlin. That's the spirit. Thank you. Are there any Ellisivs in Iceland? I actually didn't check if there are in Sweden. But
She's not known in Iceland at all, I think.
Not at all, right.
I would say, I can't think of any stereotypes about Ellisiv in our culture, but Harald Hardrada unfortunately has this stereotype as the last Viking, which is being constantly reinforced in TV shows and popular culture.
Sorry.
Well, I look at him as maybe the first Varangian. He's a state builder. He is creating something. Svein Gullbeck, who is not here anymore, but he sort of describes